The courier's knuckles rap against the oak door, a sound too sharp, too final for a Tuesday morning. I'm holding a lukewarm mug of tea, staring out at the drizzle misting the rose bushes I planted last spring. Our rose bushes, I still think, though the R has felt increasingly hollow these past few months. He's already left for the office, a ghost in his own home, leaving behind only the scent of expensive cologne and unspoken resentments. The envelope is thick, impersonal, official. My fingers tremble as I tear it open. The words leap out, stark and brutal against the crisp white paper. Irreconcilable differences, standard. But then, further down, a clause, a justification that punches the air from my lungs. Petitioner claims respondent is financially dependent, possessing no significant assets or independent income, and therefore seeks a disproportionate share of marital assets to reflect his substantial contribution to their accumulation. Financially dependent. The phrase echoes in the sudden, ringing silence of the kitchen.
Me.
Financially dependent. After all the nights I spent sketching designs on napkins while he talked about cash flow, all the core concepts I breathed into his fledgling idea until it became a viable business, all the quiet, unbilled hours I poured into research, strategy, even the company's damn logo, financially dependent. A bitter laugh escapes me, raw and shaky. Oh, David, you have no idea. You truly have no idea what I've been doing while you've been busy building your empire and dismantling our marriage. The patent approval certificate, tucked away securely in my safe deposit box, suddenly feels like a shield, a sword, a declaration of a war he doesn't even know he's about to lose. Spectacularly. My world just tilted on its axis, the ground beneath me turning to dust. If you've ever felt that sickening lurch of betrayal, that moment where everything you thought was solid crumbles, tell me where you're watching from, what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Knowing there's someone out there who understands, it helps more than words can say. It wasn't always like this. 10 years ago, David was all wild hair, infectious enthusiasm, and a dream sketched on the back of a bar napkin. His dream was an innovative software, something to streamline creative workflows. I was a junior graphic designer then, with a knack for user interface and a quiet love for the intricacies of intellectual property law, a strange hobby, I know. He'd talk for hours, pacing our tiny apartment, hands flying, and I'd listen, really listen. I saw the potential, but also the flaws, the missing pieces. What if it integrated this way? I'd muse, sketching on the nearest piece of paper. Have you considered this approach for the user journey? He'd soak it up, his eyes lighting up. Sarah, you're a genius, he'd exclaim, kissing me soundly. We're a team.
And we were.
Or so I thought. I helped him refine the core concept, design the initial interface mock-ups, even suggested the name. Innovate Suite, he was the frontman, the coder, the networker. I was the silent partner, the sounding board, the one who saw the bigger picture, the underlying architecture of the idea itself. I never asked for a title for shares. His success was our success. My reward was the pride in his eyes, the shared dream taking flight.
Naive, I see that now.
So painfully naive. The company took off faster than either of us imagined. Innovate Suite became the industry standard. With success came money, a bigger house, nicer cars. And slowly, subtly, David changed. The we became, his infectious enthusiasm curdled into a kind of restless arrogance. The late-night brainstorming sessions I cherished were replaced by late-night, important client dinners he'd attend alone. My suggestions, once hailed as genius, were now met with a distracted nod, sometimes a condescending pat on the hand. Don't worry your pretty little head about it, Sarah. I've got this. The chill started subtly. A casual dismissal of an idea I offered about a new feature. A preference for a sleek, minimalist office decor that felt cold and alien compared to the vibrant, creative chaos we used to thrive in. He started talking about my company, my achievements, we built it on faded like an old photograph. I tried to talk to him, to bridge the growing chasm. David, what's happening with us? With the company vision we shared? He'd sigh, run a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Sarah, You wouldn't understand the pressures. It's complex. He made me feel small, out of my depth, when it was my depth he'd initially dived into for inspiration. The real disruption wasn't a single event, but a slow erosion of intimacy, of respect. The divorce papers were just the formal announcement of a death that had occurred months, maybe years prior. The initial shock of the divorce filing gave way to a cold, hard knot of anger in my stomach. Financially dependent, the words were a brand, a deliberate attempt to erase my contribution, my worth. My first instinct was to scream, to wave my old sketches in his face, to list every single foundational idea that came from my mind. But then, a calmer, more calculating thought surfaced. He'd already shown his hand. He saw me as a liability, a decorative spouse to be cast aside with a token settlement. He had no idea I held the keys to his kingdom. 2 years ago, when Innovate Suite was rapidly expanding and David was too busy being CEO to notice the details, I'd seen the vulnerabilities. He was focused on marketing and scaling, but the core technology, the unique processes I'd helped conceptualize, were largely unprotected. A quiet conversation with a patent attorney, a meticulous documentation of my original contributions to the software's architecture and unique features, all funded from a small inheritance I'd never told him about. It was my secret insurance policy, not against our marriage failing, but against my own erasure. I remember thinking, if he ever truly forgets where this came from, he'll have a stark reminder. The patents were granted 6 months ago, under my name, my intellectual property. The early days after the filing were a blur of pain and disbelief. He moved out, leaving behind a silence that screamed louder than any argument. His lawyer, a shark in a tailored suit named Thompson, sent over initial settlement proposals that were laughably insulting. They painted me as a kept woman, deserving of a small severance for my wifely duties. Each document, each condescending email, chipped away at the hurt and fueled a growing resolve. I hired my own lawyer, a calm, methodical woman named Ms. Albright, whose quiet intensity one immediately trusted. I didn't tell her about the patents. Not yet. I needed to see how far David was willing to push his narrative. The challenges mounted. David, through Thompson, began to play hardball. He froze our joint accounts, claiming all funds were business-related. He suggested, through veiled legal threats, that if I fought too hard, he'd drag my name through the mud, paint me as unstable, a gold digger. Whispers reached me through mutual acquaintances. David was telling everyone how he'd carried me for years, how I'd contributed nothing. Some friends, those more dazzled by his success than loyal to our shared history, began to distance themselves. The isolation was a bitter pill. His confidence was infuriating. He genuinely believed his own fiction. He paraded his new, younger assistant, now executive associate, at industry events, a public declaration of his moving on, his triumph. He was building a narrative where I was a footnote, a forgotten chapter. Every legal letter, every smug pronouncement from Thompson, every pitying look from a former friend was like a stone added to a scale. On one side, my grief for the man I married, for the dream we shared. On the other, a cold, clear anger and the weight of the patents I held. There was a moment late one night, surrounded by piles of legal documents, the insulting settlement offer staring back at me, that I almost wavered. The fight felt too big, too ugly. Maybe I should just take what little he offered and disappear, try to rebuild some semblance of a life from the ashes. The emotional toll was immense. I felt like a ghost in my own life, invisible, voiceless. Then Ms. Albright called. "Sarah, Thompson is pushing for mediation. He says David is prepared to make a final, generous offer to avoid a messy court battle. He's implying it's more than you deserve, but wants this over with quickly. He also mentioned off the record that David feels you're being unrealistically grasping. Unrealistically grasping." The phrase hung in the air, a final insult. That was it. The scale tipped. The grief was still there, a dull ache, but the anger was now a sharpened spear. He thought I was grasping? He was about to find out what it truly meant to lose his grip. A cold, Almost serene clarity settled over me. He had orchestrated this entire narrative of my dependence, my nothingness. He was so sure of his power, his control. He was about to learn that the quietest person in the room often holds the most unexpected cards. "Ms. Albright," I said, my voice devoid of the tremor it had held for weeks. "I think it's time we discuss the true ownership of Innovate Suite's core intellectual property. I have some documents I need you to see." The silence on the other end of the line was profound. Then Ms. Albright, ever the professional, simply said, "Send them over. We'll adjust our strategy accordingly." The mediation was set for the following week, in a sterile conference room in a downtown high-rise. David was already there when Ms. Albright and I arrived, flanked by Thompson and a junior associate who looked terrified. David exuded an air of bored magnanimity, a king bestowing a final, regrettable favor. He gave me a cursory nod, eyes flicking over me with a dismissive air that still managed to sting, despite everything. Thompson cleared his throat, a smug little smile playing on his lips. "Well, Sarah, Ms. Albright, we're glad you've agreed to this mediation. David is prepared to be reasonable. He understands divorce is emotional, but business is business. He's offering a one-time payment of $500,000, plus you can keep the car. A very generous offer, considering your lack of direct contribution to the marital estate's primary asset, Innovate Suite." He slid a document across the polished mahogany table. David leaned back, arms crossed, the picture of confident control. "Take it, Sarah," he said, his voice softer than his lawyer's, but laced with the same condescension. "It's more than fair. You can start over. Be comfortable." I looked at Ms. Albright. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a wild bird trapped in a cage. This was it. The moment the script flipped. Ms. Albright smiled, a calm, almost gentle expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Thompson, David. It's certainly an offer." She paused, letting the silence stretch. David shifted uncomfortably. Thompson's smile faltered a fraction. "However," Ms. Albright continued, her voice still mild, "we have a counterproposal. Or rather, a clarification of asset ownership that might simplify matters." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a slim file. Not legal papers, but copies. Crisp, official-looking documents. She slid them across the table. "These are the patent certificates for the core technology, proprietary algorithms, and unique user interface design that form the backbone of Innovate Suite. As you can see, they are all registered in the sole name of Sarah Jensen, my client." The air in the room seemed to solidify. David, who had been idly scrolling on his phone, looked up, a flicker of irritation crossing his face. Thompson picked up the first document, glanced at it, then did a double-take, his eyes widening. He snatched the next one, then the next, his face paling with each page. David frowned. "What is this, Sarah? Some kind of joke? More legal maneuvering?" Thompson looked up, his voice a strangled whisper. "David, these are legitimate. U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Granted. They cover everything. The Innovate Suite engine, the primary interface framework." He trailed off, looking utterly poleaxed. David snatched the papers from Thompson's trembling hands. His eyes scanned the documents, his confident smirk dissolving into a mask of disbelief, then dawning horror. The color drained from his face. He looked from the patents to me, then back to the patents, as if he couldn't reconcile the two realities. This isn't possible," he stammered, his voice losing its assured baritone, cracking slightly. "Innovate Suite is my company. I built it." "You built the company, David?" "Yes," I said, my voice quiet but firm, cutting through his sputtering. "But you built it on my intellectual property. Ideas I conceptualized, designs I created, solutions I architected. Solutions you implemented, marketed, and profited from, while systematically erasing my involvement."
"But why?"
"How?" he finally managed, looking completely undone. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, gaping shock. "Why?" I echoed. "Perhaps as a safeguard. Perhaps because I saw, long before you did, that your ambition might one day eclipse your integrity. As for how? Diligence. Foresight. Something you accused me of lacking. Thompson, recovering slightly, tried to bluster. This is outrageous. We'll contest this. This is theft. Ms. Albright raised an eyebrow. Theft, Mr. Thompson? Of fully registered, legally granted patents in my client's name? Based on documented prior art and conception she can readily prove? I think you'll find the burden of proof for theft lies rather heavily on your side. In fact, one might argue that Innovate Suite has been operating under an unlicensed use of Ms. Jensen's intellectual property for some time now. The potential damages, royalties, it would be substantial. David just stared at me, his face a mixture of fury and utter devastation. The man who had confidently accused me of financial dependence, who had planned to discard me with a pittance, was now facing the reality that his entire multi-million-dollar empire was, in essence, mine. He hadn't just underestimated me, he'd completely failed to see me at all. He saw a wife, a dependent, not the silent partner whose intellect had laid the very foundation of his success. The hunter had become the hunted, caught in a trap of his own making, a trap built from his arrogance and my quiet, patient foresight. He didn't just lose leverage, his entire position had evaporated. He was the one who was now, in a very real sense, dependent on my goodwill. The silence that followed was thick with the unraveling of David's world. His bluster deflated, leaving behind a hollow shell of the man who had walked in so confidently. Thompson was frantically whispering to him, but David seemed to barely hear, his gaze fixed on me, a maelstrom of emotions swirling in his eyes, anger, betrayal, and something that looked suspiciously like fear. So, Miss Albright said, her voice cutting cleanly through the tension. About that settlement offer. Perhaps we should discuss a new figure. One that reflects my client's 100% ownership of Innovate Suite's core intellectual property. Or, alternatively, the terms under which she might be willing to license it back to the company. Her company, in essence. David finally spoke, his voice hoarse. You planned this all along. No, David. I replied, the anger now replaced by a weary sort of sadness. I hoped I'd never have to use this. I hoped the man I married, the partner I believed in, was still in there somewhere. You filed for divorce claiming I was a financial burden, that I contributed nothing.
You forced my hand.
You wanted to know my worth? Now you do. The negotiations that followed were swift and brutal, but not for me. David had no cards left to play. He could fight, drag it through the courts, and risk not only losing the company but also facing a massive lawsuit for patent infringement that would bankrupt him personally and destroy Innovate Suite's reputation. Or he could accept reality. He chose reality. We didn't go for a messy takeover. I didn't want to run Innovate Suite, not anymore. That dream, the shared dream, had been tainted by his betrayal. Instead, Ms. Albright structured a deal. A sale, essentially. I sold him my intellectual property, his company's core assets, for a sum that made Thompson physically blanch. It wasn't just a fair share of marital assets, it was the market value of the patents, a figure that dwarfed everything else. He had to liquidate significant portions of his stock, leverage other assets. He kept Innovate Suite, but it cost him almost everything. He was no longer the undisputed king of his castle. He was a monarch deeply in debt to a power he never acknowledged until it brought him to his knees. The irony wasn't lost on me. He accused me of being financially dependent, and in the end, his financial future became entirely dependent on my willingness to sell him what was rightfully mine. The divorce was finalized. The wire transfer hit my new, solely owned bank account. It was a staggering sum, more money than I'd ever imagined possessing. But sitting in my quiet apartment, the one he'd left so disdainfully, staring at the numbers on a screen, there was no elation, just a profound sense of quiet. A chapter closed. A painful, bitter chapter. There was a strange emptiness in the victory. I had proven my worth, not just to him, but to myself. I had protected myself, my contributions. But the marriage was gone, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. The man I had loved, or at least the man I thought he was, had been an illusion, or perhaps a casualty of his own ambition. I didn't stay in that city, surrounded by ghosts and memories. I moved, started fresh. I invested wisely. I even started a small consulting firm, helping young inventors navigate the complexities of intellectual property, ensuring they protected their creations, their voices. I used my experience, my quiet strength, to empower others. Sometimes, late at night, I think about David. I hear Innovate Swede is still going, though not with the same explosive growth. He's still at the helm, a little more weathered, a lot less arrogant by all accounts. We never spoke again after the final papers were signed. There was nothing left to say. He got his company. I got my freedom, my independence, and the undeniable truth of my own value. It was a harsh lesson for him, a painful validation for me. The scales of justice and karma had balanced themselves with a satisfying, if somewhat tragic, precision. He wanted a divorce, where I walked away with nothing. Instead, he was the one who paid the ultimate price for his blindness. That signature on the patent document, it was more than ink. It was my voice, finally heard, my value undeniably stamped onto the world. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight to be seen, to reclaim what's yours, I'd love to hear your version in the comments. And thanks for being here with me through this. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life, stories of quiet strength and unexpected turns.